we're less than a month ahead of EU elections, and I think that this report by Carnegie Europe, which I hope you all read it, Talking the Radical Right's Influence on EU Foreign Policy, is something that we all need as a guidance, as a warning, and as something to understand what lies ahead of us and what we can do, all who are dealing with EU foreign policy. So to present the report, which was highly supported by Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs here today, I could not think of a better panel, I think. Our hosts and report co-editor, director of Carnegie Europe, Rosa Balfour. Thank you for next to that is the Finnish parliamentarian, but not so long ago was Finnish presidential candidate, and sometimes before that, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Pekka Haavisto, welcome. And certainly not least, Szelényi, director of Democracy Leadership Academy, Hungarian parliamentarian, and the person who knows Orban to his core, because if you haven't read her fantastic book called Tainted Democracy, Viktor Orban had a speech on, you should. So, welcome. Thank you. Rosa, before we start, I will give you just short time to give us an overview, what you wanted, what you concluded, and what lies ahead of us with this in please.
Thank you very much, Ivana. So let me start why we decided to work on this. And I think, I personally got engaged in a project about 10 years ago, actually, on the rise of populism and its impacts on foreign policy. And so I've been watching politics evolve for a decade or so. And my observation was that there are political responses to the rise of the new actors of the political scene. They're divided into two camps. One is the camp that overestimates their impact, cries wolf, and it reminds you of the story of the boy who cries wolf, and the wolf never arrives, and the villagers lose trust, and they don't believe the boy anymore. And then one day the wolf does come and eats up the boy. So that's one group. Another group think that forces can be dealt with, can be bribed in one way or another, can be contained, and can go on. And I think politics has kind of been overestimated and underestimated. My bottom line was, we don't really know what these parties are about, we don't know enough about them, and that's why politics has been unsuccessful in addressing the parties and the issues that is the reason for which today we're no longer dealing purely with populism of left nature, of right wing. Actually, we see that the radical really consolidated and is doing very well and is increasingly influential at the European level and the international level. So it's the radical right, which is not the populist right. And basically, there are a lot of academic literature. We chose to use the definition by Zsuzsanna, who is accepted very broadly as sort of founding academic field. And the radical right is an illiberal right, but it is democratic. The extreme right is undemocratic as well. So these are the parties we're looking at, those 14 parties. It's not we chose to look at what they think about foreign policy and how they actually European politics. I'm going to go really quickly, just a few of the findings and a couple of points, and then we can have a broad discussion. I don't want to summarize the report. So it's once a new website works better, you can find, maybe you haven't read it, there is a infographic, there's a map. Go with your cursor onto a country and click on it and see what the political party of that country thinks, the radical right political party of that country thinks about development, enlargement, or trade. So you've got a nice infographic which can be a useful tool. So there are a few points that I'd like to make. First, a lot of damage has been done by the radical right, by the responses to the radical right by mainstream political parties, the central ones. And that's very much the case. We've seen that for the past years. The whole debate about migration has been successfully framed by the radical right as securitized, the barbarians at the gate kind of narratives, and mainstream political parties have responded by accepting the framing and adopting policies that are far more focused on closure rather than on managing. Nobody talks about which other ways we could do migration. So a lot of damage by comparison to past policy principles that European states have embraced already. And this has been done without the radical right getting their hands dirty. It's done by centrist. And I think the next policy area that's going to be affected by this dynamic is climate. And we're ready to see that politicians supposedly in the mainstream are saying we should slow down climate because this is moving too fast, and therefore preparing to undo some of the progress made over the past the Green Deal. We also see that when they are in coalition governments, they have a huge impact in cutting development funds for multilateral institutions. This is happening already, it has happened. So it has been done. And this in turn affects the EU and it's working in organizations, at the United Nations. There are several dynamics in this context, and this also affects the whole EU value-based agenda. Often the radical right is not alone in doing this, often together with others, as parties, conservative parties, for instance, LGBTQ agenda. That's where there's a lot of agents. But beyond the various policy issues, and I'll talk about this further in the context of this discussion, a lot of attention is to Ukraine, but there are other matters there as well. But beyond that, what we've uncovered is dynamics that take place behind decision-making centres in the EU. And one of these dynamics is that some parties have been more, the diplomatic tactic of trying to contain these factors by being controlled, by striking alliances, that's called socialization, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I think that my panelists will elaborate a little bit further. But that's one dynamic that we identified. I also think that in some cases, the transactionalism has limits. And the limits are that it encourages practicing the system who might not thought about transactional politics to actually endorse that because they get short-term gains from it. So if you start operating transactional politics, this has been done with respect to Hungary in particular, who has been blocking multiple agendas in the political security committee, or various foreign policy venues, manages to extract some concession in order to buy consent, then other actors think, well, maybe we can do this too. This has created, and it has undermined the spirit of politics, and it has created an atmosphere in which there's less trust, there's a loss of faith in actors, there's a loss in the idea of negotiating in space. What's hedging dynamics? The sorts of hedging dynamics that we see around the globe. The US say, hey, Russia's in Ukraine, are you on our side? And say, well, I'm going to hedge them. Not sure. So sort of à la carte that Timothy Garton-Ash wrote about recently. And finally, another important thing I think is says a lot with respect to the level of trust within EU and EU actors. In some cases, there are certain actors have been voting or supporting policies that are in favour of external actors. And we know that actors like Russia and China are increasingly medical internal affairs of democratic states. So having someone at the decision-making level who can pursue, promote, support certain positions or policies, or block, a lot of it is blocking, can be quite convenient. Now, I think one of the questions that we asked all the diplomats that we interviewed was, we know that common security policy making is intergovernmental and we need member states. This is so the question is, when is it that sort of when is it that problem is tied to specifically to the radical right? And one has to be cautious. But I think the trajectory would be in favour of supporting dynamic that undermines collegiality, that leads actors to think about short-term gains rather than the greater good of building consensus, building united policies. The final point is, what is it that we do address? There's policy. Europe does a lot of foreign policy. That this is what we were interested in. Of course, the biggest impact of the radical right has been on rule of law policy within the European Union. So, I don't want to underestimate that point. And the other thing to talk too much about is actually the upcoming European elections, because so much of the policy takes place at the governmental level. But basic thinking, right? What would the EU look like with 5 member states, or who have a radical right policy in coalition governments? What is it that would go wrong? That's what we try to look at. Final point, I think that this really is the final point. The US has sought comfort from the facts that the radical right is divided in 2 political parties. My mic's gone off, back? I don't know. They're divided in 2 political parties in the European Parliament. They all pursue the nationalist agenda, and we've sought comfort from is that they are the likelihoods that they'd be able to cooperate. Actually, I would say that following on the logic of the hedging, these actors, both in Europe and elsewhere, have shown that they are perfectly capable of cooperating, providing some red lines up. And that they're not seeking long-term alliances. NATO, the West, etc. So they can play à la carte. This is happening in the European Union as well.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for this introduction. I just want to speak all be ready for the questions. I see a lot of people here in the audience, which I'm glad to see, and also to greet several hundred people who are watching us also online. So you can also pose questions in the comment section to us. So, Szelényi and Haavisto, because here, your 2 countries are the ones which Rosa mentioned are these two, let's say, parts of the story. One is socialization, and the other one is contagion. Right now, we know. I would like to start with Susa, because talking about transaction is also ideological as well as transaction. And concerning his revolution that he wants to play out within Europe, what can that mean in this context, overall foreign policy, turning into possible error?
Thank you very much. Wow. So I have big noise, right? So just a couple of things to say about, and of course Orban and his government for 40 years is regarded and is behaving as a radical in the EU. So there's him, not just for other political right parties, but also how certain political actors may want to reshape the EU, which is in tension actually, right? Wants to leave the radical politics change. And of course, this is a mystery idea how. Um, the story they say is that they are so want to Europe of nations, which we probably understand because it's so explicit, it's easy narrative, what exactly that means. And it's interesting to look up what this sovereignist politics means, because this is a term what Viktor Orban's party and many other party actually use. So this is one of the kind of ideals which they pick up easily early on, and then they use it. So if, after where this term is coming from, this is a term used in the 2000s by Russian ideologues. It was typically aiming against liberal democracy. When Putin started to take real power in Russia in the second half of the 2000s, which was also tied to invasion of the Caucasus, but we don't do that. Basically, the sovereignist idea is illiberal. It's not. So if we regard European Union as a project, that sovereignist actually means it's else, it's illiberal. Whatever it tell what it means in Hungary, it's an autocratization process. So this means that it's anti-liberal, it's anti-pluralist, it's one big power, it's led by strongman, it's a kind of absolute minimum understanding of democracy. So that's what we ought to do. The other thing what we say, Ivana, that Orban is not only transactional. His transactional is serving his ideology. And so what comes out of from this kind of sovereignist ideology? His word is the West dominance of the West is over. We are on the losing side globally. So I'm a victor. I'm not going to be on the losing side, right? I'm on the winner side because I'm called victor. It's funny, but it's also true. This is not. It does not on the loser side. So if the EU and the West is losing and losing dominance, then obviously opening to those who are the winner of the future is this what is a kind of orientation. So many of these parties, radical right parties, also turning towards Russia and China because they are not so much Russia at the moment, but is on the winner side, and this is of course very tempting. So what does this mean for the European Union? We have the lot not just to have European elections in a couple of weeks, but we also celebrated the 20th anniversary of accession of EU, including Hungary, and they had a lot of very interesting speeches. No separations in Hungary, but there were a couple of conferences, and obviously Fidesz's politicians were also speaking, and there was no quite clear story about how Viktor Orban and his official view of the European Union. They basically say that the original German-French consensus and with this increased with on German on French reconciliation and leadership is over. We have to deal with this because since 1990, the reunification of Eastern European countries and specifically 2004 in the EU, it opened a completely different understanding of the European Union. It's not about France and Germany and strengthening the core and therefore their political social model, which is democracy, but it's reunification, literally. So the two sides should recognize each other equally. It doesn't matter who is paying for it. It's a different question, but core periphery doesn't exist. It's a reunification, and this is how we Easterners see it. So there is this idea, and I think for Eastern European radical right parties, there is very strong resonance in this understanding that are not second grade statistics of the now after 20 years. It's really not just not legitimate, but it's really annoying. And in order that the EU partners do understand that this is a different notion from the original one, radical means are necessary, because through normal talk, they didn't get the point. So radical techniques, maneuvers, strategies are not only allowed, but even necessary.
Always the country promoted values-based of its own. Human rights, all of that Europe as such was bragging all these years that it has, and got to this point in history. Concerning that through Finns or Finns parties, basically, so what's your scenario concerning this socialization? Let's call it. Well,
question, and thank you invitation. Nice being here, and congratulations for the Carnegie report, and also great interest reading the report. Also the Finnish part, there is Thomas Stewart, particularly his story. Now you have to. I'm a politician. I'm not a researcher, but maybe going back to the history, Finland has not always been the happiest country in the world. Yeah, it's now some polls that during 1960s we had a huge unemployment. We particularly had a population that was evacuated to Karelia, which Russia took from Finland during the Second World War, and there was a growing eating among that population that they are sidelined in the society and so forth, and that gave space for the first populist party, Finnish populist party or whatever it was actually the beginning of the true things. So the population has a long roots. Many people moved from Sweden to work at the factories and so forth in the 60s. And people were opinion that society didn't protect people and didn't give an opportunity to work. So when you go so deep, there is also some roots for the current populism and right nationalism. And then came, of course, like the immigration policies, which was core of, and has been the core of Euroscepticism when the bailout issues were discussed. Greece, we spoke more about the economy than Finnish economy in our parliament, I have to say, and because it is by the populists a very, very, very strong way. Then people dream Finland leaving European Union and so forth and so forth. But it's also interesting to see how the scope has been changing in the populist policies. The Ukraine actually has been a big changer in the sense that our populist or our true Finnish party is very much in favor of Ukraine winning the war. And for that reason, their attitude even towards European Union has a little bit changed, because the Union is mobilizing now the aid to the peace facility and so forth. So it's more positive towards Europe because of Ukraine. It's also, I would say that the same issue has happened with the NATO membership and so forth, because the security is the core issue in the Finnish debate. But then I'm thinking about the foreign policy, and I think Rosa mentioned some of these. If the Euroscepticism is melting, I cannot see any melting on the immigration or asylum policies. Actually, it's getting the hard Rwanda model is very favorable among these people. It's about the climate issue and green transition issue. People dream still about the cheap gasoline prices, and that's something that could be achieved into politics, and all others a failure and so forth. It's against development cooperation. There is a paradox actually that when people should be, or sometimes say that people should be helped, they don't come to Europe, but then you ask, what do you think about the development cooperation? And we are helping people when they are. The answer is negative also to that. In China has been something that has been dividing opinions, but I think currently the Finnish is or the truth quite critical because Russia is again about the Ukraine issue, and this makes the debate quite interesting. So then you might ask that have we somehow integrated the populist in the power as well? It's difficult to say. This second time the first time split totally. It's a question about the euro, so and currency and euro issues, and now they are bourgeois government, and the big victories in the government phase that is actually now the development cooperation. So getting other immigrant policies to Finland and so forth. These are some of the issues. One issue I have, this is my last point, is the Middle East policies, because there is a quite strongest protest it seems to be in the Finnish party, and again it's not really good thing to get European policies together. I know all the difficulties that they already exist. They are in at least three different camps in the European Union, but how we could influence this conflict, Europe should come together on that issue.
Thank you so much for this introductory remarks. What you mentioned and all of you mentioned. So migration, climate, of course, war in Ukraine as the most existential issue for all of us. Now, Middle East, we talk about Africa, development such, but all the complex of questions regarding our relationship towards Africa with migration, with climate, with Russian and Chinese influence on all of the sides. We certainly won't go into many details about what's written in the report, but to contextualize the field of EU elections and, of course, waits for the US elections at the end of this year. So when you put all this into this puzzle, what can be your, let's say, advice, or what you concluded within the report you understand in the introduction? What are the steps that can be taken to move things into, I can say, right direction, the correct direction, because we don't know how the new commission will look like and how the parliament will look like after generations.
So, I mean, I think, as I said, a lot of damage has been done. This is no rowing back, etc. And this said, I think at the level of the European Union, shall we say also, I think the main responsibility really is in the transformation of politics, how unresponsive it is to change. Institutional change, demographic change. So that's where the main responsibility lies. Then let's try to break it down a bit. You've got, what can the EU do? And I think the EU should be, I'm going to take even a further step back. Given that we're going to have a new leadership, given all the polls are indicating that the parliament is going to be much more far right spectrum, therefore certain policies could well be reversed. Can the EU afford that? Probably not. I mean, if the EU is not going to pursue a climate agenda, nobody else is going to be effective. And that means that has planetary implications. You need to have leaders on climate. So let's just go back to basics. What is the EU useful? Why is the EU important? What makes the EU hang together? And that's the scale, right? So all the new initiatives of the European Union are focusing on upgrading and upscaling new capacity on the economic front, on the defense and security front, on building resilience front. In order to do that, you need the buy-in of the member states, you need a narrative that is going to be persuasive. So this is something that comes from Brussels. Second is climate, again, which needs to come from Brussels. But the third is the civic values that have made the EU. think the insufficient attention coming from institutions in EU leadership on ensuring that rule of law and liberal democratic principles continue to be founded glue that keeps hanging together, that this stripped at the EU level. More specifically, I think it would be called on those that are making spoilers without a real idea of what they want to do, right? Without a real alternative plan. And so instead of accommodating the process, I think what should be clear and say, well, what do you propose? What is your idea on migration policy? What is your idea on how to deal with Syria for mid? What are, what is proposed? And just be a bit more, I think, more public debate about these rather than fudge through consensus on the minimum common denominator, which is insufficient, at least in terms of that would be at the EU level. But at the other level, it really is about national politics, and I also say it's a lot about local politics. So at the national level, it should focus more on youth and women, right? Research showing that the younger generation is also divided. The men are really far more to the radical right, women are progressive. Where women is often, we saw that in Poland. And the youth to vote, they vote for liberal democratic party. They're not necessarily the progressive side, but they are liberal democratic. So in Parliament, there are polls suggesting that more young people will go to vote. So I'm not sure that the polls saying that radical right are going to win and get majorities. I think we still need to the indication that younger people are going to turn out to vote. And then the third thing, I really do think that local politics has lost significance, and a lot of issues and has been quickly discounted. Migration are actually about management of schools, housing, space, right? So it's, in the EU, the EU and the member states because things don't move, but it's also that local capacity to address local issues has diminished. And so I think that's another place. I think there are lots of people who are interested in what's happening. So that I think that's another place where politics can reconnect with people.
Of the questions after this round, the first round of your questions. Zsuzsanna, when we talk about values-based policy, when we see what's going on around us, for example, today in Georgia, leading what was said, this fight for democracy. On the other hand, within Europe, we have still a lot of differences geographically and within the societies, inequalities from various reasons. So when you put Orban as a guy who beat Xi Jinping, as the guy who said, okay, let's ceasefire, I will talk to Putin. What can we, what can we think of? People like him will have votes, what Rosa mentioned in the European Council, especially talking about majority in that.
No, better than you hear about majority voting. It's a complicated thing in terms of foreign policy shaping. But what we have to know is that in terms of foreign policy, people like Orban give a damn of or whatever. They are purely interest-based. It's a classical foreign policy approach. It's the national interest, whatever it means, right? National interest is also quite for example, in the case of Hungary, I would probably say have a different national understanding than Viktor Orban for my country. So it's interest-based, basically. It's all about power. So I think this, whether we agree with this or not, we have to know that this is a consideration, attitude. And I think it's very important not to give a rule-based approach to foreign policy. I think kind of definite European interest to able to operate within Europe, so to maintain this as much as possible globally. Because if everyone is going after their own, whatever means national interest, that's really a international order, and we're already moving to that direction. So Orban is interest-based, and I think many other radical right parties will be like this. When they get power, and unlike that, they have leading power in a coalition, or even not having, Viktor Orban is governing without any coalition partner for 4 years, having constitutional power. This is really a major momentum, and I think this, I would like to come back to the responsibility of local politics. So very much about our life is actually depending at locally, nationally, and this is why it's also elections will be very interesting. We see, because we talk about European in here in Brussels, but actually what we get comes from national elections. So moderate parties, and I would love to talk more about this than like mainstream parties, because I think there's a big change in parties practically in all countries. But the moderate term, reasonable moderate parties do have to deal with this issue, and how they also support rule-based, local-based democracy in our own countries, because that is the basis for Europe. So I don't think that we can do it any other way. So China approach, just one, because you raised it. One of these being to Budapest. I think that was a huge power demonstration from Viktor Orban. It was also setting the scene in building negotiations within Europe in the future. So how he this relationship, because obviously the China issue is a European foreign policy issue. There's a lot of disagreement. There are big divisions between countries and political parties on how to deal with China. So no one knows exactly what the 1618 agreement what is signed with CCP is about. This is all very secret. But what we know is that we will know these agreements later, because this is how Orban is moving 2 steps forward. So he's facing negotiation potential. So he will put this back on Europe's agenda.
Before we address the elephant in the room, which is also the first question we have online, whose name is Donald Trump, I would like to ask Mr. Haavisto about one issue that is shaping up to be crucial for the next commission, that is defense. Talking about security policy, defense policy, this kind of geopolitical situation, how do you think that far right will behave in this environment? With migration, of course, a mixture of.
It's an interesting question. Well, first I think the Finnish overall position, we have always been advocating 42.7 paragraph, and we have always been asking where is the thing 42.7, and nobody answers us. So we and France have been together saying that we mobilized, and we still think that should be mobilized, and it's not enough. Perhaps we more. Of course, now about the defense commissioner or defense industry commissioner, it's positive from our perspective. It's about military mobility, but it's the hybrid threats and all these issues. Of course, it's also preparing to the worst case scenario regarding the US. It can happen in US elections, and somehow maybe not US leaving NATO, but say staying calm on the European connections and somehow withdrawing the Europe all this can happen. Our attitude is always, let's prepare for the worst. So that's our advice area. How then police parties, right-wing parties, I don't know exactly the position of others, but as I said, from our point of view, the Finnish party has been taking the security issues very seriously because of this Russian threat. And may I also just add on how to influence the situation. I was running a quite successful presidential campaign, not enough, but more than 48% of the votes. And we started to use TikTok, where actually that part of the youth that is not thinking very liberal way and very democratic way exists. And first we had some resistance there, but we were decided we were extremely there. We also know podcasts. Actually, there is a variety of podcasts. The podcast world, at least in Finland, is also dominated very conservative people. So we went there. So we went to those media that is used also by the radical right or by the populist and so forth, and it seemed to be a very successful strategy. Not to try to deny and avoid them, but to just go and swim, jump to the water.
I will read out the question, which you all know. How the Trump president of the U.S. the influence of radical right parties in Rosa?
So,
All the way.
yeah, I mean, I think if Trump were to win, I mean, some people think if Trump were to win, that will be for Europe. No, it will be very dividing moment for Europe. I think there'll be fragmentation in regardless of the color of the government. But for practical right, I think it's actually quite tricky because a lot of he's best mates with some of these leaders, and you know, this top star in several circles in the United States. Trump has also directed his ire against countries that are, for instance, not 2% defense spending target. That includes Italy, which has a radical right leader in coalition with another radical right party. So I'm not entirely sure how that could play out. We talked about out the conflict for Jinping. I don't think so I think I'm actually in two minds. I think Trump would be a disaster because Europeans would benefit. But I think the struggle is to try and negotiate themselves with the new president will affect all countries, regardless of the colour of the government. And it's going to be, I think, pretty nasty competition to show to Trump that we are spending enough on defence and to offer whatever it is they think Trump will be wanting. I recently, because of the news listened to, and Abe Shinzo, the late Japanese Prime Minister, said when Trump went to Japan, you give him what he wants: burgers, not sushi. Take him to the golf course, give him a gold golf bat. Take him to a sumo wrestling match. So this is probably what people, and I think actually they're preparing to do that already because you've got national delegations going to talk to the that are close to Trump that are writing about what the future Trump administration could look like, and they're doing that on a national basis. There's no, as far as I know, collective EU effort to do this in concert. So double impacts. One is on the fragmentation of Europe, and the other is probably somewhat complicating for the right part of the government because they might not be able to deliver what Trump wants.
Pick up on that particular question, please.
Thanks for the intriguing debate. I have two questions that are related, and the first is, everything that you said about the mainstreaming of the far right, how are we where open basically the gates only? We're talking about containing the far right and their influence on democracy. And the second question, which is related to this, is it really about democracy, or are we talking about the relationship to Russia, the relationship to NATO, and basically where Atlantis is belonging? When, like, can it be about democracy when we have the one side willing to integrate, or when she's willing to integrate Meloni, but trying to fight back on Orban on peace?
But start with the second one, if you don't mind. Who would like? Zsuzsanna, would you pick up the second one?
What was the second? What was the second? Yeah, of course, that's a very good question. I think the whole report is about that, and this I really suggest you to read it because it's a very sophisticated analysis. National interest or political party in partisan interest, which is different from national interest. But as I said, it's interlinked, so it's oftentimes not very easy to separate. If you aim to build a power in your country with non-liberal means, and you gain your and political influence at European scale because you liberal situation, and therefore, and you use radical means in a community where cooperation is everything, and it's the two things are completely related. So I think it's not so easy as that to separate, and we have to think it in its complexity.
We first start with the Trump issue because we are asking ourselves, do we know what kind of regime as we don't know. That's Trump doesn't know what he's planning to do. That's the best guess. There's not decisions are made by the day and they can vary. So there's not maybe permanent policies. That's my best guess. But if you can see some silver lining around the cloud, I was thinking first month's foreign minister, Pompeo was that time still. We dealt with Pompeo on Africa issues, on Syria issues, on Middle East, on Russia, and it was just normal discussion. But when it came to climate change or Arctic issues, it became very difficult. No, because they were not Arctic or climate problems didn't exist, and environmental problems didn't exist in their agenda. There was a limitation what issues you can deal with, but those sort of normal security issues were on the list. And also in asking from NATO leadership, it was during the Trump time in NATO, and the answer is that US told its commitments, all the manpower in Europe, all the resources in Europe that they have problems, they dealt with it. It was not so problematic as it looked. The rhetoric, of course, Brussels was out with and all issues, but it would we could manage that period. So then, of course, you can ask, could you manage another similar period, and what would be consequences? We don't know the final answer on that. That's we should prepare for the first also. Then about the Rome, the pilgrimage to Rome that everybody is now doing, and it might be politics, but it's also mathematics. I understand that when you want to have votes for the commission and for the leadership of the commission, you need the votes and you negotiate votes. I think that's what's going on, but of course it's hopefully not about the contents, hopefully not about some of those very sensitive issues that we have been discussing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Alliance had a strategy from the beginning of trying to divide the right, and I think from I don't know whether it will work in the end, whether to get all the votes in Parliament to have a second mandate. That is the goal of it. That I think the question is what price is she and the political parties actually represent to pay. Meloni has been quite good at extracting the maximum from the lion. I mean, deals that he has struck. I mean, I don't think much deals in terms of impacts, to be honest. There's a lot of posturing and not much content. The deal with Tunisia, Albania, the Africa summit in Rome, there's content. This is just posturing to the electorate that whereas I think the Prime Minister von der Leyen was pretty high, and I think she has lost trust of other members. And that's a delicate balance that term politics is. The other thing is what's happening inside Italy, because the expectation that Meloni would not turn the line on Ukraine was so great, which was incorrect, actually, because her party is a practicist party, always. But the expectation that she would match with the gratitude that it's towing the line, it's towing the line on Ukraine, but not looking at other things done internally, which are priority for the government. So, order, restricting access to abortion for women. So, all sorts of policies, but the EU has been silent. And so I think the risk that, no Italian government has the Hungarian governments, right? So far. So things can be undone than in Hungary, put it that way. But the delay in addressing it has been one of the reasons for which we find ourselves in a certain position with respect to Hungary. So it's a very delicate.
And we have the most active group here. So first row, the gentleman with the glasses in the blue shirt, then the gentleman behind him, and then the gentleman here. This one.
Questions. What will be the impact also for policy presidency of Orban, which is coming from June to December, and also, of course, US election falling into that time window? What does it mean in terms of reactivity to some of that for the EU? And the second question to maybe so a little bit question on political strategy, because I'd argue the foreign policy is one of the issues still that divides the far right or the extreme and radical right more than other issues. So being how can maybe the democratic parties also capitalize on that maybe even more than they have to have in the past, and kind of dividing them even more, capitalizing based on that other areas to kind of keeping them from power also in the next year.
To the gentleman behind you, so we take all three.
Thank you very much. I also have two brief questions. One concerns the transactional aspect of their behavior. If they block everything that is being discussed, is everything allowing them to reap benefits of EU cooperation. I mean, also in terms of resources, we saw Orban blocking in NATO, Sweden nationalization, Sweden was promised to get something out of the EU. So I'm wondering whether it's more of a strategic engagement where they do one thing but say another. It's constant in everything. Then the second concerns a bit the European integration process and the effects of these parties on the EU integration process. So such a strong push on defense integration, on the instruments that the EU has to address policy, also about how the EPF is being used. So I'm wondering, what are we seeing here? Is it more a case of shifting integration, disintegration? Is becoming more or less integrated? Thank you very much.
And gentleman here.
Thank you. So my question is connected to some of the things you haven't touched it here, but it was the version that was online of the report. So in relation to how the relationship with an EU country actually is impacting EU foreign policy, but also internal policy, which is the relationship of some political parties to Israel, for example. Like, how do you see that developing in view of UNSC, how the EU has been adopting very anti-human rights discourse, particularly from some countries because of its relationship with Israel, as far against some states to undermine rule of law and at least civil rights internally, so undermining the credibility of the UN, the national laws, CJ and the ICC. So, how do you see that developing in view of how the increasing shift we're seeing in Israeli politics right now?
So much. We will have now fast telegraphic answers. Zsuzsanna, impact of Hungarian presidents of the Council of the EU.
Yeah, of course, that's a interesting enough. First of all, I have to say that Hungarian public administration is preparing strongly and very. So there are hundreds of Hungarian ministry employees who are perfectly prepared and will everything to run as quick as possible. Probably they want to be more successful than any other country before. So I think that's one thing what they can expect. And then, of course, there will be a political side of the story, which we don't know much about. We don't think that this is a migration and in law. There's not much happening in these issues other than competitiveness, maybe. But of course, Viktor Orban is a political animal, utmost figure, so he will use this and predictable way. Whether this would be slow or with real kind of weight, I don't know. It's very much up to Brussels administration to, him control. So well, he cannot speak in the name of Europe when Trump is elected and things. So I think that is, but we do not have to worry too much about either Orban or Trump or whoever. I mean, we just.
How can parties capitalize on far-right parties being divided on foreign policy?
I can say actually just one remark that it's some parties it's difficult to find the political family of the Finnish true Finns. So Finnish party was a member of Europe of Freedom and Democracy, and to the ECR they moved to the ID, then back to ECR, and now they have said that before the ECR they have to go to DP. So it's just and all this is also the foreign policy influence issue. So it's to them to find some at least.
So yes, transactional aspect.
So I think, to be honest, the experience so far on the blocking is that it isn't much. The EU goes out of its way, the other goes out of their way to try and add the blockages. And then you have a greater number of declarations now that are on behalf of the High Representative alone, such as the one on Georgia, or on behalf of the 26 or 25 members of the European Union, which has an external impact. But there's another thing that I'm not sure we actually wrote in the report, but there's some we had to through where we just voice tiring these negotiations are, and that all the time spent trying to reach agreement at the expense of other things are the more important things. So just the drain. But the costs have been low. And political choice. I mean, the costs. You want to add something?
To add, because NATO members mentioned, and we were in the middle of that with Hungary and with Turkey. Really, at some moment, we asked that advice to have 3 shares. And we buy only 3 shares without Hungary, have NATO without member. And then there was some friend said, you think how often we have been this? So it's also in these structures, of course, the huge that these kind of blocking policies. Of course, this has the impact to enlargement, because we definitely don't want to have a situation where somebody can block in the future. This just majority decision So we have to show this decision-making mechanism before the enlargement is established.
Yeah, so to this because many people ask me and probably other Hungarians, what can we do with Orban, right? So what is the strategy? So there is no one strategy. That's the issue. It's a political game. What he's playing, it's he is a tactician and he is in a war. He is a revolutionary figure, so he's always. It's the whole thing is a big game for him. So. Uh, he's doing various things. It's not one straightforward to straight Orban. Right? He got so far in the European Union because he knows this institution perfectly well. Up to the bottom, he is there for 30 years in Indian politics. He was negotiating the accession treaties, 4 years as prime minister. Politicians back and forth, 15 years, prime ministers for I don't know 50 in all countries. So he has a very deep understanding. And he knows what is schools, for prejudice. Well, he knows how to do Trump because people. So there is an investment in this game from Orban and his surroundings. If someone wants to, you know, wants to do something with Orban, should invest time in learning his ideas, his vision, his personal weaknesses, and should kind of this game. And he's enjoying the game. So of course, if someone is tired, that's not the usual way of doing things in Brussels. Then by now, after 40 years, everyone should have understood it. He is present. He's not the only person who is doing this. So I think that is whether we like or not. It's investment and it's learning and it's engaging and it's not necessarily the kind of discussion that you are sitting in stage and it's an intelligent discussion. It's different things. But it's based on knowing the institution and of course and this is why you have to read this fascinating report because it has 40 case studies in that analysis of political rights 14 countries, and it's really fascinating to go through. You got much smarter as I did when I read it.
Thank
And
you.
it's of course this is
Of
Rosa.
course, the last question, I think that enlargement was in a way answered to. Relationship.
The right device, very small positions. That's something that is to be noted. Again, I would add it's not alone, not just the countries with radical right that have more, should we say, stronger positions. Israel, there's more than them. Radical right alone isn't achieved, it has to be but it's something definitely to take into account. And I would add to that when in 2004, when the enlarged to Central Europe, to Cyprus, soon after, before that, a lot of the worry was about the diversity, difficulties in decision making because of the diversity of positions. I remember going to the council, people, apart from Russia, we're very united in everything. And this question of Israel stays it's under the carpet. And now, I think it is one of the consequences of the rise of the radical right. That there is a sense that you can break the norm. You can go against EU policy for 30 years on the Middle East. But maybe it was in consequence, little, at least they were united. Whereas I think that the split has made dissenting voices has empowered them to speak out. There's also differential integration and defence, and I do think that this is where things are going to hit all, because if the EU is going to manage to address all the big international questions, the China position, the productivity gap with US defence, security, etc., it needs to make some big decisions. And that the EU hasn't been making capitals markets, upscaling the single markets, etc. That, if it is to be done with rule of law, that has to be done with a bit more executive control. So who's going to do that? I think some countries and others might not see integration, which in the context of an enlarging Europe could even work, but it does mean that some would stay out. And my feeling is that Hungary, my idea is a sort of simple and lake back to not want to have experience from Brussels on how it runs the economy, and therefore will not like thank you. And so that there's going to be a differentiation. That's a kind of the concept. So.
On the Eastern and Israel, he speaks so much about the double standards, so that's the political speaking. The West have double standards, but I think the situation, do we have standards also standards against no standards? What's going on in the Eastern area? Very exact.
Pekka Haavisto. Rosa Balfour, thank you so much for this very insightful talk, I think, ahead of what's awaiting us by the end of this year. Thanks to all the authors of this fantastic report, which are radical view from Carnegie Europe. Please read it, send it to your contacts. It's important for everyone to read. Thanks once again to Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs of creating this report. Both Carnegie Europe, and we invite you all for drinks, those who are here. Those who are with us online, this will be available later on YouTube for you to read that if you want and send it to your contacts. Thank you for being here.